Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about the books that surprised me the most in 2019. These are going to be the books that I either didn't think I would like going into them, or they weren't on my radar at all until someone like really pushed me to read it, or just in general books that aren't the normal type that I pick up that I really ended up loving. So the first two is the Reign of the Fallen duology by Sarah Glenn Marsh. This was a duology that had been on my radar, and it was something that I thought I would like, but I had owned the first book for a long time before I picked these up, and then when I did read them, I was shocked at how much I loved them, and it was one of those moments where I was like kicking myself that I didn't pick it up sooner. So this is a YA fantasy duology that takes place in this world where there are different types of mages, and the main character is a necromancer, so she is able to raise the dead. And in this world, the royals and like the high-ranking people are able to be raised from the dead, and so they kind of like live among everybody else, but they are considered shades and they can't go out in the sunlight. Their skin can't be exposed, so they have to be completely covered from head to toe, and if their skin is exposed at all, they will turn into like zombies basically. And so this duology is basically about all of that. Something kind of dark and sinister is going on. Someone is raising the dead when they're not supposed to, and there's something going really wrong in like the Vale world, which is where all the dead souls are. I really loved this duology, specifically for the characters. There was an amazing cast of characters, and I loved the main character. She was dealing with a lot of intense things. In the beginning of the first book, she lost some people that she loved, and she was going through grief, and she developed an alcohol and drug problem, and that was something that she was trying to work through in the series. She also had a female-female relationship that I loved so much. It's definitely one of my top female-female romances in a book. And then all of her like group of friends I really loved. She had an amazing support system. It was just like a really great group of friends, and I would love to see spin-offs or like novellas following all the other friends because they were just so like well fleshed out. So the next book that surprised me was The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. This was one of my favorite books of the year, and the reason that it surprised me is because, one, I thought this was a YA book. For like the first year that it was out, every time I saw it, I thought it was YA. I don't know why. I just did. Something about the cover reminded me of another YA book, so I just thought it was young adult. And then I can't remember who it was, but somebody like specifically recommended it to me, and when they explained it, I was like, wait a minute, that sounds really good. So I read it, and it ended up being one of my favorites of the year, and it just like emotionally impacted me a lot. So this book is about a girl who has been estranged from her father pretty much her whole life. He lives in Alaska, and when she was young, her mother took her and moved away from Alaska, and they haven't had a lot of communication since then. And she finds out that her father is really sick and dying, and this is her last chance to like get to know him. So she goes to Alaska, and the first person that she meets is Jonah, who is her father's neighbor, and he also works for her father, and he's a pilot, and he's the one who is picking her up to fly her over to the town that they live in Alaska, because you can only get there on like a small aircraft. And literally the second that they lay eyes on each other, they don't like each other. They're very much opposites. Kala is like a fashionista. She's very much into like fashion and makeup, and she has a lifestyle blog, and he is like a wilderness man. So they just cannot be more opposite from each other. And over the course of her time there, they do have a romance. They start to learn more about each other, and that they have more in common than they thought. But I think the heart and soul of this book, and the reason why I loved it so much, was the relationship between Kala and her father. It is just like very emotional, and I just loved this book so much. I cannot wait for the sequel. I had no idea that a sequel was even in the plans, and then K.A. Tucker just came out with a release date and a cover, it's probably like my #1, if not #2 most anticipated book of next year. So the next one is The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. I have an entire video of me reading this book, so if you haven't watched that, I will link it up above. I go through like all of my thoughts, how I feel about it, but this book really surprised me for a multitude of reasons, a lot of which I go into detail about in that video. But the first reason why this surprised me so much is because I really did not like The Wrath in the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. I gave it 2 stars. So going into The Beautiful, I had really lowered my expectations and I wasn't expecting to like it, but I ended up really loving it. Spoiler for that video, I gave it 5 stars. I truly loved it. Another reason why it really surprised me is because I wasn't expecting it to be what it was. I was expecting a vampire book, and it was more of a dark, gothic, historical, secret society murder mystery, which literally all of those things are my buzzwords. They're my favorite things in books. So like wrapping them all up together into one, it was just amazing for me, and I cannot wait for the sequel. I'm so glad that the sequel comes out pretty soon. I think it comes out in April, which is pretty quick. So I was so sick of reading books and then looking for when the sequel comes out, and it's like not for another year. But yeah, I'm really excited to see where the next book goes, because the way that this ended, a lot of things are going to happen in the next book. And I think that people who wanted a vampire book, the next book, I feel like is gonna give more of that. So the next book that really surprised me was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, this one was kind of all over the place. I went into it really expecting to love it because The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is one of my all-time favorite books, and this just sounded amazing. It is a interview style book that follows the lives of Daisy Jones, who was a singer in the 60s, fictional singer, I should say, fictional singer in the 60s, and the band The Six, who she ended up collaborating with for a long period of time. And they were very famous, but there was a lot of like drama and secrets surrounding them. And so the whole book is an interview style, interviewing all the members of the band and the people in their lives. So the reason that this surprised me was because the first 100 pages I did not like at all. I almost DNF'd it. I think I have a reading vlog. I'll try to find it and link it up above, but I was like so close to DNFing it. And then I read just a little bit more and I fell in love. Oh my god. I ended up loving it so much. I definitely recommend listening to the audiobook. It is an incredible production, and this is definitely one of those cases where I feel like the audiobook makes the story better. But yeah, just like with The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I loved Evelyn so much. I fell in love with her. I wanted her to be a real person. I feel like she's a real person, and I ended up feeling the same way about Daisy Jones. I feel like she's a real person. In my mind, she is. And I'm so excited that they're turning this into a television show. I am beyond happy with the casting. I think it's Riley Keough. Is that how you pronounce her name? Elvis's granddaughter is playing Daisy Jones, and she is exactly what I pictured in my head. I think she's gonna do an incredible job. So yeah, this book surprised me. It was like a 1-2 punch surprise, because it was like the first punch was I was not liking it and I was gonna DNF it, and I was having an existential crisis that I was gonna DNF a Taylor Jenkins Reid book, and then the second punch came in when I started to love it, and I was like, wow, okay, glad I didn't stop reading. And then the last book that really surprised me, I think, was the first book that I read this year, and that was A Heart and a Body in the World by Deb Coletti. I read this for the Reading Booktuber's Favorite Books of 2018, and this was one of the books. And out of all the books that I chose on this was kind of like the wild card, in that I hadn't really heard anything about it before I set out to do that video, and I was blown away because this really wasn't a book I would have picked up if I hadn't been doing that video. It impacted me so much. At one point I was sobbing. It is very emotional. So this book deals with trauma and grief, and it follows a girl who had something very traumatic happen to her, and to cope from that situation, she decides to run across the country from, I believe, Seattle to Washington, D.C. So she basically just takes off one night, like no preparation at all. She sees something while she's out that kind of triggers her PTSD, and she just starts running. And her grandfather decides to hop into his RV and follow her so that she's safe and has a place to sleep. So the whole book is basically her running across the country and trying to sort out her trauma and her PTSD. It's a very emotional book. It's totally about like survival and mental health and survivor's guilt. I really, really loved the relationship that she had with her grandfather. He was so sweet and so supportive, and it was just really adorable seeing him like following her across the country to like champion her. So those were the books that surprised me the most in 2019. Let me know in the comments if you guys read a book that just completely surprised you. You didn't think you were gonna like it and you ended up loving it. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!